Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. Today we're going to be looking at some terms of service related to an AI organization. So I'm just going to quickly take a look at the products to see what's in scope and how it influences the terms of service that are on the site. Now, something that's becoming more and more popular amongst organizations is uploading their terms of service directly onto the website. And generally what happens is there will be a distribution of something called an order form depending on what the customer wants to use as a service. So you see they have like different solutions and platforms. What's distributed is generally they have lots of different legal forms here and they have their terms of service, and we can see the effective date May 30, 2025. What generally happens is some organizations will distribute something called an order form. The order form is going to outline whatever solution is ordered by a customer, and then incorporated via reference will be a link to this URL page, this terms of service. Now, the reason I thought it would be valuable to take a look at this is, let me see the product. So essentially they have some type of tool that combines marketing, company knowledge, and brand, and it connects data, creativity, and distribution in one intelligent system. So it looks like they have different products. The reason it's valuable to look at the products is these products and how they interact with data generally will influence the terms that a customer is signing up for. I like looking at these because I've spoken a bit on my channel before about how artificial intelligence and privacy work hand in hand, because there's always going to be data associated with any individual's use of AI in some capacity. Now, every capacity is going to be different. One of the things that I generally collect from clients is I always ask them to list out the type of data associated with their product. Understanding your product very well is going to assist your privacy counsel when they're providing you advice on how to comply with the data protection laws. So I have a general sense of this. We can also see the cookie banners arrived here. Let's take a look. The terms of service are a binding contract between you, the customer, and Jasper AI. Okay, so let's look at the definitions and let's look at the privacy definitions. Customer, you or your means you and your authorized users. Now, just using this word here indicates to me that there is going to be individuals that utilize these services, right? And anytime we think about individuals, we think about personal data. There's always going to be some information associated with the authorized user. In order for the authorized user to access whatever platform or solution that's offered by Jasper, they're going to have to input at a minimum their username and password, both of which identify an individual, which then means it constitutes personal data. So whenever you're having your terms of service, a lot of people think that privacy lawyers only look at this, the data processing agreement, but we also review and draft these terms of service because they influence what a customer is agreeing to. In terms from a privacy perspective, it's not exclusively about privacy, but it always interacts with privacy because in order for the solution to be used, there are authorized users. And this is consistent amongst, I would say, every single review I've done so far of other organizations offering artificial intelligence solutions. So customer account means your account on the services. Customer property, let's talk about this. Customer property means the input, the output, and any other content, including text, images. We know that sometimes images can identify an individual. So they've used some very broad terminology. Without understanding how the solution works, I wouldn't be able to opine on what constitutes the input and output. But essentially, one of the documents I always ask clients to produce is to give me insight into their data flow, because that influences what types of provisions are acceptable for a customer to accept. So we can see that there is going to be at least the likelihood of having some type of image which constitutes personal data, so I would provide advisory on that. And then let's look at input. Input means the information you input via the prompts. Now, the type of information you can input may be restricted by Jasper AI. I don't know that for a fact, but it's good that they've put a definition, and I always value definitions because the definition of an input for the Jasper AI solution may not be the definition of an input for another AI solution. It's really important for organizations to really understand the tools and products that they're providing. Otherwise, it could hinder the provisions that a customer is going to accept. A lot of times, these terms of service are take it or leave it, which is why they're being offered on the public-facing site. Sometimes businesses or providers can offer contingencies where they allow customers to redline. And when I say redline, it means make edits to some of these provisions. But essentially, because it's being offered on the site, and it's generally incorporated by reference into another agreement or document. Most times customers aren't able to make edits, and one of the things that a privacy counsel generally will assist with is if a supplier or a provider tells a customer, hey, our terms are take it or leave it, sometimes customers might want a review to see if the provisions within this are something that they can accept. Can I adhere to what I am signing up to in order to access your platform? That's generally the question that's in a lot of people's minds. And we can see here that they do have a link to their privacy policy. So this is also incorporated into these terms. And it's really important for customers to review the privacy policy to understand this business's privacy practices. Now, the reason this is valuable is because I've talked about in other privacy notice reviews and privacy policy audits that you should be conducting due diligence anytime you are going to be allowing a third party to process personal information that belongs to your organization. That's really important. You need to be able to understand their practices. By adding this link, what Jasper AI is saying is that this is how we use personal data. You need to review this link in addition to the terms to see, is this something that we can accept from a risk perspective? Let's say, for example, a business places their privacy policy on the website, but it hasn't been updated in 5 years. It doesn't address their processing of personal data in one geography, like let's say China or Japan, and your company is in China or Japan, right? Then you're going to have a problem because you don't understand what their practices are in that region of the world. So it could influence your own obligations under the data protection laws in China or Japan. Does that make sense? So even though they are located, let's say, for example, in the United States, or a company is generally, if their privacy policy doesn't outline their practices in the geography where you're a customer, that could influence your obligations. Will you be able to fulfill data subject access requests if they haven't addressed it? So there's a due diligence component outside of the review of these terms that needs to be done. Privacy is all very interlinked, irrespective of whether it's an artificial solution that is processing the data or an alternate solution. But I think it's particularly important for the AI solutions because there are different types of outputs that can be manufactured using these algorithms. Businesses should know what it is they're signing up for if they're going to be utilizing AI. I would say for a number of different reasons, the AI space is ever evolving. Businesses need to be aware of where their data is going to be placed because it could influence their own obligations and their own responsibilities if they're giving it to a third party without understanding what the third party will be doing with the data. Users means all visitors, users, and others who access the services. User accounts. So I talked about this before. Any use of artificial intelligence is at a minimum going to process some type of personal data. Now, the variety of personal data is something that the business should really look into before they start to train or test their AI, but at a minimum, the solutions are going to process a username and password, and that's been addressed in this definition section. So let's scroll down a bit. Your customer account gives you access to the services and functionality that we may establish and maintain from time to time. We may maintain other user accounts. I'm interested in what this means. Other user accounts belonging to the customer or other user accounts belonging to other clients. If you open a customer account on behalf of a company or other entity, then you includes you and that entity. By connecting to Jasper with a third-party service, you give us permission to access and use your information from that service as permitted by that service and to store your login credentials. And we talked about how at a minimum, there's going to be some type of personal data, which is what they're addressing here. You may never use other user accounts without permission. This is a very important sentence to add into any type of terms because, well, let's talk about from a data protection standpoint. It's important because your personal information belongs to you as an individual. You have rights as it pertains to that personal information. If you share your credentials with another individual and you allow that individual to log into the Jasper AI system, there are complexities around data subject access requests, and there are complexities in terms of monitoring their responsibilities under the respective data protection laws. Now, this terms of conditions doesn't really specify geography yet. I presume that these terms are distributed to customers globally. Most businesses are trying to obtain customers on a global spectrum. Some don't restrict themselves to one geography like the United States. Now, without having additional details on this company, I wouldn't be able to opine that. Sometimes businesses will let me know, hey, we only operate on a national spectrum, meaning our products and services are directed to consumers in the United States. That is going to influence the types of terms that you generate or create or distribute towards your customers. If you operate on a global spectrum, you need to look at what your responsibilities are in those geographies from a privacy perspective, and make sure that the language aligns with what you're putting in your terms of service. If you're using European Union centric wording related to privacy, but you sell your products and services in the United States, you might get pushback from business customers that are like, this is not an applicable term to us because we operate in the United States and the services you're providing are in the United States. So there's a lot of complexities that go into drafting these terms. Let's take a look to see processing of personal data. The parties acknowledge that use of the services does not require Jasper to process any information related to or identified or identifiable natural persons. This is an interesting sentence. In other words, customer acknowledges that it does not need to provide input that contains personal data in order to make effective use of the services. Okay, I like the clarification of the sentence because we've already identified above that there's going to be usernames and passwords, which is personal data. But the clarification here is that in order to use their platform or solution, customers don't need to input personal data to have effective use of the service. So the input data does not need to be personal data. However, the login credentials do need to be personal data, and that still needs to be protected by this company. However, if customer wishes to submit personal data to Jasper for processing on its behalf, it must first execute the data processing agreement, right? And you can see the relationship between this document and the other document. And you can also see here, they've got not only a link to the DPA, which is separate to the privacy notice. Notice that this link says DPA, and then above we had identified the privacy policy. Let me explain the distinction as a last discussion for this review. The privacy policy, and I like to call it a privacy notice. This displays what Jasper AI does internally. It talks about their practices. Hey, we retain your data for X amount of time. Oh, we share your data with our third party. The data processing agreement, alternatively, let me tell you what this does. It outlines the responsibilities that Jasper AI has in their capacity as a data processor. So it's a slightly different document. And businesses don't realize this, but there's a lot of policy documentation that is drafted by a privacy counsel for businesses outside of that notice. The notice on your website is not the only privacy documentation you need to be taking into consideration. And we can see here that Jasper AI also has insights into its cookie practices, and the cookie practices display this is how we use cookies. It just says this is how we use cookies. Same with the privacy policy. This is our privacy practices. The DPA says this is what we will do for you as a customer in our capacity as a data processor. The privacy laws have certain responsibilities associated with a business when it processes your personal data. That is very different to what the business is doing internally with all the data that's processed. So I really hope you enjoyed this review of the terms of service. If you have any comments or questions, I welcome them all. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I'll see you in another one.